All right, good
Circulate,
morning.
Paul.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Homegrown Lecture Series. We have two more in this quarter. Today you will be learning some about house plants with Paul Winski. And then come July, we're going to hop into a whole new quarter. So be sure to keep a lookout in a couple weeks and then with the newsletters to find out what those topics are. And may as well not delay this. Paul, welcome, and thank you for talking to us about houseplants today.
All right. Well, thank you, Brandy. Yeah, just to give a plug. So in 2 weeks, we will have on the 3rd a legendary lecture by Mr. Shannon Dietz, who is our Ag and Natural Resources agent. And then we will close out the second quarter on the 17th with Art from the Garden, and Brandy will be presenting that. If you are new, if this is your first time to Homegrown, welcome. If you've been here before, we appreciate you coming back. We appreciate your support. And I just want to give a plug. If you see my background, let me move out of the way here one way or another. That is the Master Gardener Trial Garden down in Precinct 2 off of Genoa Red Bluff Road. So if you're on Beltway 8, if you're ever out that way, this is our flower trials. We've got petunias out there from the cool season that are still just putting on a heck of a show. So if you are ever out that way, by all means, they are there on Mondays and Wednesdays in the morning, say from 8 till about 11 or 12. So again, Genoa Red Bluff Road, and it's the Genoa Friendship Garden. So without any further ado, that's my 50-cent commercial. Let's get started. So we are going to talk about fabulous houseplants. And so I've got a lot of information for you. There's a ton of plants out there, so this is not going to be all inclusive on plants, but if you're started and into it, hopefully you find some information that's helpful. If you're thinking about it, I think this information will be great in getting you started. So houseplants in general have become very popular over the last 3 to 5 years. It's been a boom, and actually, what we're seeing is the younger generation, the millennials, are really getting into the houseplants overall. As you can see, sales just in 2020 increased 15%, and we've seen sales across whether it's indoor plants, outdoor plants, in 2020 due to the COVID-19. I think everybody was gardening one way or another, whether it was interior or exterior. The good thing is most house plants are tropical foliage plants, and so we can use them uh, around here as patio plants. We can move them outdoors in the summer and things like that. So it really works. It's quite flexible for us to use the house plants in our area. They do improve air quality. And I know there's been a lot of studies, but just take that with a be mindful that in order to really improve that air quality, the number of plants that you would need in a given space is really quite high. But they do filter out the air. They do a positive have a positive effect in your interior environment. If you're going to fail, and we all fail growing plants, if you're not going to have success with these three items are probably the main causes. It's either poor light. So we're taking a plant that's maybe a low light type plant and we've got it in too high of an area, or vice versa. Temperature can come into play, especially down here when we are, our seasons are quite different, where we're running the air conditioner for long periods of time. So depending where that plant is placed, that could be an issue. But the major one is probably improper watering. And most of the times we water them too much. We bring in some root rots, the plant declines, and then we have issues. So just be aware of these three things when you're thinking about buying a house plant, where you're going to put it, and how they'll all work together. I talked about popularity, and if you go on Instagram, and I'm sure I'm not on Pinterest, but I'm sure even if you go into Pinterest, but these are some of the sites that are quite popular within Instagram. So at Houseplant Club, The Sill, Houseplant Journal, The Potted Jungle, some great names here, Succulent City, Earthy Children, and I Drink and I Dig, and I Drink and Dig. Oh, I'm sorry. I drink and I grow things. There you go. I'm not as up to speed on all these, but there's a lot of resources. A lot of these are really, if you're just looking for ideas of how these people are staging their plants and growing them and what they're doing. So there is a lot of popularity, a lot of interest in house plants across the board. So when we select plants, house plants, just like if we're selecting bedding plants, perennials, annuals, we want to start with healthy plants that are insect and disease free. They've got healthy foliage. So if something's got yellow edges or brown margins or things like that, let's pass on it. The other thing is make sure we try and match that plant with the environment where you're going to put it. We often talk about trees, right plant in the right place, even shrubs. The same thing is for indoor plants. We want to make sure we've got that right plant in the right place in order for it to be successful. If you find those plants that you can see some leaf buds or new growth coming, the quality is going to be right on, spot on. So you want to go with that. The other thing I do on a regular basis, if I'm purchasing plants, is I'm going to knock them out of the pot. I'm going to turn them upside down. I'm going to look at that root system. If I'm seeing nice, white, healthy roots, I'm not seeing overly watered. I'm not seeing it being pot bound. That's another good sign. Healthy roots, you're going to have healthy tops. So you want to be aware of that and consider that also. Houseplant groups usually they fall into these categories, and this is just to give you an idea. So we've got the succulents, which you can see in this image. So no spines or burrs on it. We've got foliage plants. There's ferns out there, flowering plants. African violets, gloxinia, spathiphyllum. We've got our tropicals, where for us we can use them indoors or out. We've got cacti. We have orchids. Some folks and orchids have come a long way. The price has come down on a lot of orchids. So they've almost become a commodity type flowering plant that we can really enjoy. And then you've got that sort of the plants and under that other, where we've got those airplane plants or the bonsai or the carnivorous plants that some people are into. So this sort of gives you just an overall view of the different categories of how these house plants will be available. I can't see that. Yes. Yeah. Growing conditions. So these are the things that we need to understand with regard to growing their plants. The light or window exposure, depending on how your house is situated. And we'll talk about intensity, the duration, and the quality. Water is going to be key. Temperature is going to be key. Humidity comes into play. And there are certain times of the year where the humidity is going to be a bit more challenging. So there's some tricks that we can talk about in order to get that through. Ventilation, especially in the winter, can be an issue. And then fertilization. These plants will need fertilizer, maybe not as much or as often, but they will need it. And there are times when we can run into some issues with what we call soluble salts, and we'll touch on that as we work our way through here. So light intensity. So when we talk about light intensity, we're talking about, the nearness to that light source. So, if you have the old incandescent light bulb and you put your hand near it, of course, that intensity is going to be much higher as opposed to if you step away 3 feet, 4 feet. So most house plants, when you look at the labels, you're going to see classification of either low, medium, or high. And so if a plant would fall into the high intensity, Think about your windows on the south side of the house. These are going to be the most intense, and they are also going to be the warmest. If we fall into that medium, then we're talking about probably east and west windows. The east and west windows have about 60% of the intensity of what the south window would have. And then as we come down to the north window, that's got about 20% of the intensity of what the south window would have. So this just gives you an idea, and you may find out that, as I've got listed down below, factors. Do you have curtains on it? If you've got blackout curtains, you're probably not going to put the plant by that unless you open up those blackout curtains, because it's not going to be enough light. Do you have trees on that side of the house, and how will that affect the light? The overall weather, different times of the year, our seasons definitely here. As we get into the fall and winter, day length is shorter. So you may have to move some plants around. If you've got something in the north window that does fine in the spring and summer, it may not be enough light for it in the winter, and you may want to move it to either an east or west window, or maybe even the south, just to help it along. And then another thing is, the cleanliness of those windows. So you might have to clean them up a little bit to improve the light intensity coming through. This is a great handout. The Shannon or Brandy will put the link in. This is from the University of Florida, and it's just a nice way where they've broken it down by water requirement on the left-hand side. So you can see here, water requirement is either keep moist, water once the soil surface has dried, or it allowed to dry quickly. And the best way, the easiest way to tell if a plant needs water or not, is just lift that pot. Even those bigger plants, if you can easily lift it, it's going to need some water. If it's heavy and it's got some weight to it, you're probably good. And then the other thing I like about this is it breaks it down with what we call the measurement is foot candles for the light intensity. So we've got direct sun, 4+ hours. We've got high, which is over 500 foot candles, medium, and then low. And you can see some of these plants travel across multiple areas, which is nice. So some of them might be able to go in from high to medium to low. Other ones are just medium to low. There is an app that you can download on your phone called Lux, Lux. If you just Google that or in your app store or whatever. I have it on my phone, and it gives you at least it gives you an idea of what the foot candle is in that area at certain times. So it's not highly scientific. Light meters can get expensive, but this is something on your phone that works just as well and gives you a good idea of what that intensity is. Duration is how long, how much light it's exposed to. And in this case, for the foliage plants and the house plants, it's probably not that big of an issue, because we're not growing these to flower. In flowering plants, we have short day plants, long day plants. If it gets more than a plant that's long day needs more than 12 hours. A plant that's short day needs less than that. So the duration is not as big a factor with these house plants. And if we have issues with duration or intensity, we can always compensate by applying some artificial light. And the key here is we don't want to apply more than 16 hours, because we need that plant to shut down for a while and not continue to photosynthesize throughout full 24 hours. Your lighting options are incandescent if they're still out there, fluorescent bulbs, or LEDs. So you've got some other options, but as you can see in this image, this person's got done a nice job with that large bay window, some larger plants, and then they've got the table down below in order to grow some of the other ones. And they've even gone up high on the hanging basket. So you can really do a great job with the space and really spruce it up with the different types of house plants. Water, as I mentioned earlier, plant losses due to either over or underwatering, and in most cases, it's overwatering. When we do water, we want to make sure that we are getting down, to the bottom of that plant, because majority of the roots are in that lower 2/3 of the pot. So if we're just putting a little bit and we're just getting the surface wet, but we're not watering all the way through, you've got a saucer and then that water's not coming through, we're going to have some problems. That plant's going to have some problems. So as I mentioned here in the third bullet, water till it runs out that bottom. Uh, and the good thing is, we get the water all the way through. It gets to the roots. The other thing is, it flushes out any excess salts, so we won't have any issues. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as to what to look for if you've got some soluble salt buildup. Temperature, ideally, and everybody's house is different, but ideally, day temperatures you want between 70 and 80, and night temperatures in that 60 to 68 range. And so some houses, they keep it at a set temperature, and the plants will acclimate to that. And so just be aware of that. This is just a rule of thumb. If you're running too high or too low, the plant will let you know, especially if it's for a long period of time. We can see reduced growth if our temperatures aren't in line. If it's too warm, we'll see that spindly appearance. It's going to stretch. If there's a draft, or if it's too cold, we may see some foliage drop. So these are some signs that maybe that plant is being stressed, and something's not quite right for that growing condition. Humidity is also key. And humidity, as we all know, we live in Houston, so we know that percentage of moisture in the air is humidity. This is probably going to be more of an issue during our late fall into winter. As our humidity drops down, we can get drier. Everybody starts using chapstick and hand lotion because we're just drying out. So there's ways, of course, to get around that, to rectify that. Certain people I've seen, they've got humidifiers that they will run, in the area, just to build that up. The other way, quick way, easy way, is if you've got your pots or your plants sitting on a gravel tray, and when you water, that water comes through, and then the plants aren't sitting in it, but it's in that layer below, and over the course of the day, that humidity will come up. So you create a nice micro environment, and these plants will definitely enjoy that. Growing up, we had an orchid. My mom would have that below and never had any issues with it. And this is up in the Northeast, where we're much drier throughout the entire year. The other thing is just have a mist bottle, as we see in this picture. And the main thing here is I would recommend misting early in the morning, so that foliage can dry out over the course of the day. It builds up that humidity, again, that microenvironment. And the last thing you want to do is you don't want to mist late in the day, where the light levels go down, and then that water's just sitting there. It doesn't get a chance to evaporate and build that humidity up around the plant. Ventilation, we've got the air ducts here. We don't have the radiators as they do up in the Midwest and the Northeast. So watch where you're placing some of these plants, and depends on the time of the year. I definitely. You don't want to put them directly under those vents, because you're just going to stress that plant out one way or another, whether the air is too cold coming out from the AC, or it's too warm when you're running the heat. So just be aware of that look, or that placement. The other thing is I know a lot of people like to have plants right by the door as they're coming in and out, and sometimes those drafts can cause some issues also. So just be aware of that, by the doors or by the air ducts. Fertilization is definitely going to be required, but you're not going to have to fertilize as often as you would, say, your annuals in a container outside, or things like that. And this is going to be dependent on the vigor of the plant, the age of the plant, and just overall its growth habit. Normally, we recommend a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And you can see there, I just put in, 14, 14, 14, or a 20, 20, 20. They will all do well. There are specific houseplant fertilizers out there. They are available as a granular, a liquid. Some of them, there are tablets that you can just set on the surface. The main thing is A, that you do it, and B, make sure, depending on the type of fertilizer that it is, read the directions to make sure you're using it properly. You don't want to over fertilize, because that's going to result in some negative issues and responses on the plant. Ideally, when that plant is actively growing is when you're going to when it's going to need the fertilizer the most. And so for our area, I've got March through September. Depending on the plant, some of them may wake up and start putting on active growth in February. Some of them may grow through October or November. So it's you will get to get that idea, that feel, for how your plants are responding, if you've got them in the right spot, as to how much fertilizer they're going to need. Ideally, winter months, you can probably cut down on the fertilizer and not have to worry about it, and just let that plant rest. It'll put on some growth, but it's not going to be actively growing as it would be from March through say September. This image is nice because it shows, some of the controlled release fertilizers, which work extremely well. Usually, depending on the size of the pot, it may be a teaspoon or a tablespoon, and this will just break down over time. These prills, or these little BBs, they've got different coatings, different thickness, and so they will release the fertilizer over time. So you don't have to worry about it. It's usually say a 3 to 4 month release rate. Sometimes it might be a 6 month. So you may be able to get by putting it down once, and that'll take you through the season. Again, it's just going to depend on what your preference is and what you feel most comfortable with. Soluble salts. So I mentioned this, and this is a result of maybe putting out too much fertilizer. Maybe your water quality has high soluble salts, and sometimes this could be an issue. If you're on municipal water, it's probably not. It's not going to be that. It's going to be poor watering practices and possibly too much fertilizer. So if you've got soluble salt issues, you're going to see reduced growth. The leaf tips are going to be brown. We're going to see a dropping of the leaves. If you knock that plant out of the pot, we're going to see dead root tips, and we're going to see wilting. And the problem is, then we see this wilting, and then people want to keep putting on more and more water, and we may have some issues. How we know that we've got some soluble salt problems is look at the surface of the soil. And if we see this accumulation of this crust, whether it's white or a yellowish tinge or something, then we know we've got some issues. We're not watering properly to flush that out, and it's starting to settle and accumulate on the surface of the soil. If you've got clay pots, whether you grow them outside or indoors, we may see, you'll see that white crusty buildup on clay pots, and that's what's happening. Is the salts are being pulled out, and we're seeing that accumulation. Easiest way to fix it is to leach that pot. When we talk about leaching, we're talking about watering so that water comes all the way through that soil profile, that column, and we're flushing out the excess nutrients, those salts, in order to get that balance back in the soil. So if you had a quart pot, it's at least twice the volume, so 2 quarts of water. But the main thing is water it, let it drain through, let it sit for a while, and then come back and give it another flush and let it flush through again. And then don't water it for a while, let it just dry out, and you'll start to see a change. You'll see this crustiness will go away, the accumulation will go away, and the plant will start to respond in a more positive way. So other considerations that we've got with our houseplants. All right, so we're talking about decorations here. We're talking about the interior, so you want to match things. So we want to make sure we've got it looking great in a decorative pot, not just the the black pot or whatever that it came with. We want to make sure we've got the right potting mix. You don't want to be going outside digging the soil from your garden and using that for your house plants. Will they get insects and pests? Absolutely. So we'll touch on that. And then we're going to touch about grooming. You want your house plants to look good. You want that environment to look good. And so we're going to touch briefly on these 4 topics. Our containers can be made out of just about anything. You go to Depot, Lowe's, At Home, and they come in ceramic, they're in plastic, clay, fiberglass, metal, whatever. And so colors and designs and textures, it's whatever your imagination is, you can find it in the pot. The main thing is we want to have that container. We want it to be large enough to provide enough space, for those roots to grow and to have proper drainage. So as you can see in this image, if you look where I've got my pointer there, these white containers, the pot itself just sits down in there. So when they water these, there's not going to be any holes in the bottom of these. So when they water, they may pull the plants out, or when they water, they will collect some of that water in there, and it'll be at the base of it. So just be aware of it. If you're going to go with large decorative pots, and you're going to grow in that pot, make sure it has holes in it so it can drain. The last thing we want to do is turn these into, bog plants with too much water and it's not draining, and your plant is going to decline for you rather quickly. If you've got your plants and they're in the smaller pots, say 10-inch diameter or smaller, and you want to keep them in that, you can either bump them up into a larger pot or you can keep them in that. You're going to probably need to repot that on a regular basis because it's going to use up that soil. You're going to just have to help the root system along because you don't want circling roots. You don't want it to become pot bound. Larger containers, depending on the plant, rule of thumb is maybe every 2 years you're going to have to repot that. So again, containers helps with the design, helps with the overall look and the presentation of the plants. We want good potting soil. We want a good mix. It needs to be porous. We want to make sure we've got a good balance between the root aeration and the drainage. And then it's, the soil is what is going to retain the water and nutrients. So again, don't skimp on the potting mix. You want a good potting mix. Most of the commercial mixes have a mix of peat moss, perlite, or vermiculite, and then some will already incorporate a low charge, slow release fertilizer. So it will help the plants along once they are transplanted in there. But you can see, again, no garden soil, nothing like that. Go with what we call a soilless base mix because the plants, that's what it's growing in already, and it's just going to perform much better when you transplant it in there. Insects and pests, if the plant is under stress, again, like anything else, whether it's indoors or out, it's going to be more susceptible to either diseases or insect overtake population. And most of these population spikes are caused, if we run into problem, is when we bring new plants in. Sometimes we're not paying attention, we're not looking to how closely, look on the underside of the foliage, things like that. Probably the 5 worst pests, the filthy 5 I've got there, are whitefly, mealybugs, spider mites, aphids, and fungus gnats. So just keep an eye for those. And fungus gnats is usually an issue when you're keeping your soil too wet. The adult is not the issue. It's an annoyance to you and I because it's flying around your face. But the adult lays her eggs in that top layer of soil. Those eggs hatch, and it's the larvae that will end up starting to feed on the root system and cause the problems. So Um, just beware. A good thing, a good practice is if you're buying some new house plants, you bring them in, have an area where you can quarantine them, keep them away from the rest of the, the general population until you give them a week or two, and you see that nothing is no suspects are showing up, and that's just a good practice in order to, if there is any issues, you can treat them right there before spreading it out to the rest of the plant population. And then grooming. We want these plants to look good. If you're indoors, you're seeing these plants on a regular basis, whether it's at the home or at the office. So you want to remove those dead or shriveled leaves. You can clean the plants as in this image with the rubber tree. There are sprays. There's different things. There's even leaf shine out there if you like that glossy look. If you've got a larger plant, actually taking it and putting it in the shower and turning the shower on and just rinse it off to get that dust and any kind of buildup off of it. I do that quite often. And so it's a nice quick way to get it cleaned up and just freshen it up, and that plant is going to look much better, and I'm sure it's going to be much happier having all that debris and things and stuff removed from it. So with that, now let's go ahead and get into some of the plants. We talked about the idea of the information on growing it. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the plants. And again, this is not all inclusive. These are ones that I know you can be successful with if you're starting out. And even if you've got them, maybe you'll get a few ideas from them. So,
Paul,
yes.
Can we ask a couple questions before you get into the plants?
Sure thing.
Okay, so one person wants to know if you recommend using a water meter.
Yeah, they're helpful. They are quite helpful. It'll give you a good idea of the moisture content in that soil. So by all means, if you feel comfortable with it, and again, these moisture meters, there are cheap ones. You get what you pay for. So if you spend a little bit more money, you'll have a lot more confidence in that product.
All right, and I don't know if you're going to remember, but someone saw a plant on your light intensity slide, and she was wondering what it was, and that she has a problem with the leaf tips drying out, and it seems like it's due to overwatering rather than underwatering.
Okay. So if she feels that if she's overwatering it, then just allow that plant to dry out a little bit more before you come back in with your next water, and just see what happens. The older growth, once the damage is there, you can't get rid of it. But keep an eye on your new growth, and if the new growth is emerging and coming out healthy, then you're spot on. You've got it under control. If the new growth continues, then there's something off, and whether it's the amount of moisture in the soil, you're watering too much, or it could be technically possibly the soluble salts, because you'll see that tip damage there. But if it's an older fault, the other thing is just be mindful, and we see this with plants in general in the landscape. Older foliage isn't always going to look beautiful because you've got new growth coming, and so nutrients are being pulled away from it. So this is where that grooming comes in. You can cut away some of that older foliage that isn't looking great because you've got this great new growth that's coming. So all the foliage isn't going to look perfect all the time, and normally we'll see, if we start to see some decline, it's the older foliage where we're going to see it. If the new foliage is young, healthy, and looking great, you're doing a great job, and everything's fine.
All right, can I ask another one?
Sure thing.
I'd like for you to address this because I think it's a good question that other people may have. Does it help to use distilled water versus tap water to avoid some of those issues?
I don't think it matters. Now there are, and I can't remember what species it was. There was, as I was looking through this, there is one species that they recommend not necessarily distilled water, but before, like what you do with if you've got goldfish, fill up the container that you're going to use to water it, let it sit out overnight, and then water it the next day. Whether it's the chlorine or the fluoride or whatever it is, they do recommend that, and I can't remember what species it was. But distilled water is going to have a pH of 7. Your municipal water is probably going to be somewhere between 6.5 and 7 anyway. Now there's other elements in there, and I've never had any issues with using regular tap water. So I am not. Now, if you've got well water and you have some other issues and you've had it tested, and you might have a little bit different, you may need to be aware of it a little bit more. But in general, if you can drink it, it's going to be fine for the houseplants.
All right, and we'll go ahead and just let you get started on the plants.
Okay, so now you guys can wake up, and I want you to give me some feedback. So we're going to do a quick poll here. So if you have your cell phone, if you put into and you want to send a text, you put in 37607, and then in the text part you put Paul Winski 227. That will give you access to this poll, and you will be able to go ahead and send in your favorite houseplant. If you are online, you go to paulev.com and you can see //Paul Winski 227, and you can type in your answer there. So let's see what some folks are what they're growing, what they like. ZZ plant, yes, one of my favorites. Very easy plant to go. Fiddle leaf fig, these are quite popular. If you could keep one alive, all right, all of them, awesome. Pothos, fiddle leaf figs, ZZ plants. Yes, these are all quite popular plants that are out there that, and they're quite easy to find. Okay, so now that you put that in, now whoever just sent that, they can type in their plant name or the plant that they like. Bromeliads, there you go. That's an interesting one because it does bloom, and the watering on that is a little bit different because you usually fill in the middle of that plant. Syngoniums, okay, awesome. Some of these I will be talking about here shortly. So I'm just always curious to see orchids. Love them. We used to have a Phalaenopsis, crown of thorns. All right, blooming, very interesting plant. Architecture, rubber plants, snake plants. There is a lot out there in snake plants. Heights, colors, that is one I will be talking about. So great job, everybody. Thanks for the input. This always helps me out in seeing what people are doing and what their chef layers. Yes, green, variegated, dwarf, there's all types out there. So awesome job. So let me go ahead and lock that, and then we will move on here. So first one, Chinese evergreen, Aglaonema. And this is the typical, the image up top here is normally way back when I've started in horticulture, this is all we had out there was this green and sort of grayish variegated foliage. It's a great beginner plant because it tolerates multiple conditions. So as you can see, light levels low to medium, watering is low. So, don't kill it with too much water. But look at some of the new genetics that's out now, some of these variegations and different colors. So it just gives you a lot of options that you can work with, whether it's the colors that you've got going on in the house, in that room, whatever. So there is just this one just reminds me of a caladium with the way that foliage is. But so Aglaonema, Chinese evergreen, versatility, and a great beginner plant to get started with. Snake plant, Sansevieria, and you can see that nice thick foliage, upright sword-like foliage, and we've got banding up top here. You can see some of the variegation and the variation in the foliage. I remember as a kid walking through the neighborhood, and on the sun porches, you always saw these snake plants growing. Those African violets and philodendron. That was back in up in Philadelphia. That's what you used to see on a regular basis. Light levels. Oh, I am so sorry about that. Light levels again, low, medium, and high. So just be aware the variegated ones will probably do better maybe under the lower light, where those that are darker green will probably benefit from being under higher light. And again, water is low, so don't overwater these guys. Let them dry out in between. And the easiest way to know if you need it, lift a pot, and you'll know if it's light, give it a drink. If it's heavy, that plant is fine. My favorite, ZZ plant. I just like saying the name, Zamioculcas zamiifolia. Um, my 4 kids are all out in apartments now. They all got ZZ plants because it is indestructible. So if 20 somethings can grow them, anybody can grow these plants. Uh, I love the history on this. This plant was discovered in East Africa in the 1800s, and it didn't hit the market until the 90s. So for almost 200 years, this plant was out there, but it wasn't being used as a house plant. Does well in low light, high light, very low water. Mine, I have a large one, about like this, give or take. And if I water it once a month, every other month, and the plant is fine. And I've had it for, we've been in the house for 20 years, so I've probably had it at least 20 years. So this is a tough as nails plant. And now there's one out there called Raven that the foliage is darker. It's almost like a black or a purplish. So keep an eye out. But great housewarming plant because if you're going to kill this, you're going to kill it. You're going to have to try to kill it because it's a really tough plant. Ponytail palm gives you that nice wispy look indoors. It's a slow grower, and over time, this can get several feet. So you can see this plant is still up on a pedestal, but over time, that could end up becoming a floor plant and taking out, covering that entire corner. Again, another one that's pretty indestructible. This bark is very thick, and so it doesn't dry out very quickly. So it retains the water, and will just thrive in that spot. So light levels are across all 3. So if you've got a low level or high level, this plant will work. And then it's low to medium on the water. So definitely allow this one to dry out because it retains that water and doesn't dry out quickly. Boston ferns, great emerald green color, arching foliage. It's been in the industry forever, well before I got into the industry. It does prefer some humidity, especially in the winter months. So this is one day where you can come through and mist it in the morning and then allow that moisture to evaporate over the course of the day, and the fronds are going to love it. Light levels are low, are medium, and along with the water. So this is one where, don't allow it to get completely bone dry. When that top, 2 or 3 inches starts to dry out, and you can tell it's getting to that point. Give this one some moisture because just remember how ferns would grow in nature. They're an understory plant. They're usually in the high compost humus type areas. So we don't want it sopping wet, but we don't want it to completely dry out because the stress on that, you'll see it in those fronds if it gets too dry. Dieffenbachia, another one that can start out as a nice potted plant, and as it matures can become a nice standalone plant or a nice specimen. Very nice foliage, large, variegated, and there's been a lot of breeding in this one also. So there's a lot of different variations in the coloring. It has a great upright habit. So if you need something that's vertical for a spot, consider a Dieffenbachia. Light levels across all 3. And this is another one. Don't let it become bone dry before you water it. Let it get a little bit dry and then go ahead and give it a drink. The Dracaena, this is the red edge Dracaena, Dracaena marginata, has that nice, almost grass-like look to it. Upright habit, and it's got that nice red edge on it. So you get a nice little contrast to it. Again, if you want to add height to a spot. I've seen these in tricolored, like a pink, a white, and a red. And they just give you that, as they mature, they give you that older tree look. Light levels are across all three, so that's a good thing. And then again, water on this one is medium. Peace lily. So here's a bloomer that we've got, but even if it's not in bloom, that foliage is just nice, deep green, has that arching look to it. It performs extremely well. And you know, having this, this is the actual flower, the florets that will open. This is the bracts, you know, similar to what we would consider with the poinsettia, with the red colored bracts. That's what that is. But this is one that will do well across the different light levels. But if you want it to bloom on a regular basis, the more light, the better off it will be. Just be aware of that. So it might be one where it blooms, maybe you move it to a spot with low light for a while, and then when you want it to bring it back into bloom, bring it to a spot with a higher light level. And then in this one, this is one that we don't want to dry out, but we don't want it, you know, when we say constantly moist, you don't want that soil to be sopping wet, that if you were to pick it up and squeeze it, you're going to squeeze water out of it. We just want it to be able to water it, let it flush through, and then, you know, depending on the time of year, give it a couple days and then come back and water it again. The philodendron, again, like the Boston fern, has been around forever. It's probably the classic houseplant, easy to grow, easy to propagate, to take the cuttings off of. The nice thing about this is you can use it in baskets, you can use it as a potted plant, or as we have in this, you know, we can trellis it or train it up on a totem. So we can either have that hanging wispy look, or we can have that upright vertical growth. So depending on where you want to use it, the effect that you're looking for, the philodendron will lend itself to either of those situations. Here's another Dracaena. This is the corn plant. So this one is, you can see it's a different species. This is Dracaena fragrans. So the leaf has that corn look to it. It's got that variegated striping. It's going to give us some height wherever we're using it. Again, another good beginner plant, and that's what I sort of wanted to focus on as I went through these plants. Light levels across all three, and then this one's in that medium range. It's not one. This is one that if you let it dry out too much for too long, you'll start to see some. The foliage will let you know that there's an issue, and you'll start to see maybe those brown tips. Crotons, Codium, again, great tropical look. It's a plant that, you know, we can bring indoors in the winter and then use out on the patio in the summer, in the spring and summer. Colors are all over the place. The other thing that you see now is, you know, this is the typical foliage that we're seeing, but now you can see very narrow foliage. You'll see waves within the margins. So there are a lot of really cool looking crotons that are out there. This is one that if it's too wet or too dry, all right, so this is like that, the three bears, you know, not too wet, not too dry, just right. If we're on either extreme on this, it's going to start to drop its leaves. So the plant is telling you something. So just be aware, am I watering too much or it's not getting enough water? And this is one that is going to prefer having higher light levels. High light levels, medium water, not too wet, not too dry. If leaves start to drop, it's telling you something, and you're at either end of that spectrum and you need to make your adjustments. Spider plants, another one that's been around forever. Chlorophytum comosum. This one prefers the high light. You know, we see these runners that come off, and we've got these little airplane plants or the little spiders coming off of it. It's a great plant if you want to introduce kids to house plants. They can easily pinch those off and propagate them. A lot of the times they'll start to root even in the air, but they root very quickly. Then they can have their own plants that they can start to grow. across all the light levels. And then this is one that, again, we don't want it to dry out too much. We want that medium amount of water on its requirement. Peperomia. Peperomia is the house plant of the year this year. The National Garden Bureau, they always talk about their plants of the year, and this year they designated a house plant. This is the first house plant that's designated as the plant of the year. And you can see here's two species, and look at the variation in the habits, in the foliage, in the variegation on that foliage. So there's a lot of options, and it's a great house plant. You can see it in these, 6-inch pot, 8-inch pot. So these different species allow for different colors and textures. And so depending on what you're looking for, you can probably find it in these peperomias. Easy on the light, you can go low, medium, and high, and even on the water, because it's got a very thick foliage on most of these, and so it's almost succulent like. So they don't dry out quickly. They will maintain their moisture. So it's a good hardy plant for your indoor scape. And then the last house plant I'm going to touch on is the common name Swiss cheese. I like to call it is Monstera. This is Deliciosa. And this is another one that adds that tropical feel. It's one that we can grow outdoors here also. I've seen it in the landscape here, just depending on how cold we get. A lot of them took a major hit with the freeze in February. There are two species. So this is Deliciosa, and then the other one is Adansonii. Light level is more of an indirect, a medium indirect. So curtain filter type light is what it's going to prefer. And then this is one where we go medium, but allow it to dry out before you water it again. But that large foliage and just a great tropical look. And then you get the aerial roots that will start to emerge on it. Now, I'm going to teach you a quick little 50-cent tip here. Jeopardy question. Botany. Alex, what is the term used for the Monstera's characteristic leaf holes? So we see these and we wonder, what's going on? Why does that plant do that? Well, it does have a term, and the answer is, what are leaf fenestrations? And the debate is why this plant has them. Some say it's because it's grown in tropical areas, and if high winds, hurricanes, the wind blows through it. The other option, which I sort of lend myself to, is this is an understory plant in the jungle. It's growing down below, and these fenestrations allow that plant to get larger to pick up the sunflex that are coming through the canopy overhead. But having these openings, there is less, it doesn't need as much sun in order to maintain itself with its photosynthesis. So whether it's one or the other, there's debate about that. But if you're watching Jeopardy and this question comes up, remember, leaf fenestrations is the answer, and you just won $1,000. So with that, I've got one more slide. I often get questions about toxicity for plants or I mean for children or for pets. And this is a link, and they will put this, it's going to be on the last slide, and they will put this in the chat also. But this is from the Missouri Botanic Garden, their fact sheet. And this is just a part of it. They've got a lot more plants listed. But you can see here with, what's one? A jade plant, Crassula. Child and pet safe is an S, suitable for homes with pets and children. And then they give you some other growing requirements: dry moisture and cooler temps. So I wanted to at least put this up so you could see that there is information on it. And then there's other places online that you can find information regarding toxicity or if plants are poisonous. But this at least will get you started if you do have concerns about these plants in your household. Here's the resources. So I'm assuming that Brandy and Shannon have probably been putting these in from University of Arkansas. Has got a lot of good information on that. Low maintenance house plants. This is from over in Travis County with A&M. The one that I showed early on from University of Florida, this is the link. And then the one I just showed you from the Missouri Botanical Garden, that's the link for that there. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you learned a thing or two and you feel more confident in growing your houseplants. And I guess we can open it up. We've got some time here. So Brandy or Shannon, are there any questions, or have you guys been manning them and answering them as we've been going along?
Yeah, I think most of them have been answered, but
Excellent.
just for the recording purpose, you know, because the people who watch it later won't be able to hear it. Numerous people have asked about rainwater, and I said it's always extremely beneficial. But do you want to just put your 2 cents in about rainwater, using rainwater for houseplants?
It's a great option. If you're collecting it, it gets back to that. Almost similar to the distilled water or whatever. But yeah, I mean, whatever source you can recycle it, you can use it, by all means, go for it. If the plant doesn't like it for some reason, you'll see, in that foliage, or if there's issues. But if it's a healthy plant, it's going to be fine. It's a great source, and if you're doing that, even better. With all the rain we've had, hopefully you've got large enough containers to capture as much as possible.
And the last question, I think, might be a loaded one.
Okay.
I did post the fact sheet that you gave me on it, but how do you get rid of the 5 terrible pests?
Good question. So if you have them, again, as we talk about in the greenhouse side of things, monitor your plants, scout them, look at them on a regular basis, look at the underside of the foliage. If you've got, say, mealybugs or scale, and it's only a few, one of the easiest ways is taking a Q-tip and dipping it in a little isopropyl alcohol and just sticking it on that plant, not on that plant, but on the actual mealybug, and that will do fine. Some of the other ones, probably let me see, a soap, a horticultural soap, or a horticultural oil, a light oil will work. You don't, if you catch it early, you don't need anything too extreme or too heavy. So the soaps and the oils that are out there will work well. I find when I've had mealybugs in a few spots, you just take that and dab it right on it, because what happens is, those mealybugs build up a waxy outer coating. So by just dabbing that Q-tip that's been dipped in isopropyl alcohol, it breaks through that and will, render that insect, it'll die over time. So monitoring, quarantining when you bring new ones in, and then if you're grooming them and you're cleaning the undersides or the top sides of the foliage or things like that, you're going to catch a lot of that stuff. And certain ones, if you see it, just use your finger and thumb and pinch them or squeeze them out, and they're gone, and move on to it. But at least you'll be aware that, all right, I'm seeing this. Let me see if there's going to be any other issues, and I'll be aware of it.
Hey, Paul, I have a quick
Yes.
question. So when you talk about watering and so forth, and I don't think I heard this or anything, but the little trick that I've heard of before is, instead of watering all at once, is possibly using like ice cubes, where they kind of break down and the water, it's not so much water all at one time, where the roots are able to absorb it and everything. Are you a fan of that? One
I,
way or the other? Is it just
I've never used it. I've seen it done. In fact, there is a series of, I think they call them the ice orchids or something like that. And that's how they recommend watering their orchids, is taking some ice, just putting it, we're not burying,
right?
we're not going to put an inch or two layer, but that is an option. And if that's easier for you and it works for you, then by all means give it a shot. I have not used it on a regular basis. I've seen it done even when I go to trade shows, and they've got large plant material. They will use ice to put around the base to keep the root balls or the soil moist if it's starting to dry out, because it is nice because it just melts over time. It works its way through, and you're not, there's a less chance also of making a mess because it's going to stay within that soil column.
Yeah. I have one other question, and just kind of maybe comment on it. I guess, you talked a lot about plants with like high light, medium light, low light, and stuff like that. But then at the same time, if you're talking about highlight, because I have windows that face the west,
Hmm.
and they, especially during the summer, they get quite a bit of sunlight that way.
Yep.
And so either on the patio or on the windows, light can also mean heat.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so not all plants necessarily like, because whether you think about it or not, there's a lot of heat that comes through with the addition of light. So, uh,
Absolutely. Yep. You are correct, and so you have to be aware of that also. In the winter time, it's probably not as big of an issue, but in the
yeah,
summer, especially down here, come
yeah,
July, August, September, um, you know, you may see some burning on the foliage because it's too much, and it may not be just the light intensity, but it might be the heat that's being generated. So that's where moving it back further away from there, or having a type of curtain that can cut down on the amount of heat coming through, a shear or something like that.
right.
That's one of the tricks that you can use to your advantage, and the plant will be much happier.
Yeah. Okay. That was
All
just
right.
my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All right. Do you want to do the two more questions?
If you've got them, let's do them.
Okay, since peat moss is a non-renewable, since it is non-renewable, do you think cocoa noir is a comparable option? This has been debated in my plant group.
Well, okay. You can use either one. The peat bogs are renewable because they continually produce throughout. When they come through and they harvest, they do not harvest them down to the base. I used to work for a company that we had that soil part of it, so those peat bogs aren't going away anytime soon, and they do replenish them. They do take them out of production. They do all the sustainable practices. So I think sometimes that gets a bad rap. The cocoa fiber will work fine also. So it really just depends on your perspective. Will the plants do well with it? They should. But either way, that type of organic matter in that soilless type base media will work fine.
Okay, and one last question. This is the perfect one to end on, because you asked the audience what their favorite house plant is. What's your favorite house plant?
Well, I would say my favorite on the foliage side is, I like the ZZ plant, because you just can't kill it, and as it gets bigger, it's easy to divide, and so that way I like that. If I was going to say a flowering house plant, growing up, my mom always had African violets, and I just love them. I like the presentation on them. They're another one that's easy to grow, doesn't need a lot of light. we had one that just sat underneath one of the lamps, and that thing just, it seemed like whether she just had that green thumb or that plant loved where it was, but that it seemed like it was always in bloom. And so I would say they would be my two go-to plants. I do have ZZ plant at the house. I've got several. In fact, I'm planning on bringing some into the office because I divided. But I have not had an African violet in a while, but now that I'm talking about it, I should probably go out and look for one. So that's my two favorites.
All right, well, that is it. Thank you so much for this talk today. It was really great.
All right, my pleasure. Anytime. Okay, so I guess we'll send things off. In 2 weeks, we will be back with Mr. Shannon Dietz and a legendary lecture. So if you've got questions about dairy production or have never even thought about it, I'm sure he will enlighten you going forward. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for your support.
It's going to be real cheesy, Paul.
It's going to be cheesy. All right. Okay, and with that, we will call it a day. So you guys, everybody, you have a great day, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks.
All right, bye.